Every so often, I am rummaging around in our home office, and I unearth this clipboard that contains the scribblings of my anesthetized mother as she awoke from lung surgery, only to discover that, of course, against her will, she had been placed on a ventilator. Now, typically, my mother had impeccable handwriting. Her desire for me to have her beautiful penmanship was the source of much stress in our household as I was growing up. We had many tearful homework sessions as she made me rewrite my work again and again until it was neat enough to turn in. And so it's a little funny to me when I see these notes that she wrote, because under the influence of the anesthesia, her handwriting is not the typical way. It's scribbled and swirled all over the place as she tried to communicate with me in post-op. After we got her settled into her room, and as the anesthesia continued to wear off, she became a little bit more herself. And at the bottom of this clipboard of scribblings are very direct instructions for me to take her Visa card and to go to Lowe's to get the stainless steel side-by-side refrigerator that she had had her eye on. She was remembering that on that day it was on sale and she didn't want to miss out on these savings. And even though this woman had just had a significant portion of her lung removed because of the cancer that had metastasized there, she was willing for me to leave her side while she breathed with the assistance from a ventilator to go to Lowe's on a shopping excursion. Well, I was a dutiful daughter, and I picked up that Visa card, and I did exactly as I was told. I suppose we could question the value of even following such instructions. I mean, after all, she was in the advanced stages of cancer. Why bother? Why bother leaving her side and missing those precious moments? Why bother spending the money in the first place to buy a refrigerator that most of us knew she wouldn't get much use out of anyway? But honoring one's wishes at a time like that is one reason to follow the instructions. And I dare say that hope is another very good reason. Now, the entire reading of the narrative lectionary this week also covered all of chapter 22, and it just concluded with verses 1 through 3 of chapter 23, which you just heard read aloud. I spared Sally Daly and you all the experience of chapter 22, but if you would allow me to summarize them for you. Before I do so, I remind you of a few things to take into consideration about the organization of our Bible. When these writings were collected over time, they were categorized loosely by genre. Therefore, what we are exploring today is a part of Kings, and we will remember from a previous sermon that it was once all one book that has later been divided. And so we're in the second part of that book. And we will do well to remember that this is considered history. But we already know that there is no objective history, and especially not in religious literature. So what you hear about today in the book of Kings corresponds to what Jeremiah was prophesying about. And for me, I know when I look at the Bible and I see those two books separated by so many pages, it makes me think that they're not connected at all. But they're actually dealing with concurrent activities. So, to summarize, in chapter 22, we learned that temple repairs or a reconstruction project was going on during the reign of King Josiah. And Josiah, throughout the Israelite history and throughout our scriptures, is considered a good king. And it's mostly because he followed Manasseh, who was a bad king. And so while he is king, these temple repairs are going on, and some of the workers discover a book. They dusted it off and they begin to read the contents, and they believe this is significant enough. It needs to be taken to the high priest Hilkiah, who, by the way, is the father of the prophet Jeremiah. Hilkiah, a secretary and the king's servant, deliver this book of importance to the prophet Huldah. She reads it and she says, "Thus saith the Lord, I will indeed bring disaster upon this place and its inhabitants." This is thought to be because the book contained law and covenant that the Israelites had long since forgotten about, out of sight, out of mind. They had forgotten about certain aspects of their obedience that was required of them. And now it seemed, because they had not been following these instructions that they did not know about, that all hope was lost. She also informed them that the Lord hears their cries, and she gives them some sense of confidence that their eyes will not see this destruction that is talked about. And the messenger takes this message to the king. Let's also not forget that Josiah, remember, he's considered a good king, and so he takes these messages seriously. Even though their situation seems very dire, he goes about instituting significant changes, not only throughout the temple, but throughout all of Jerusalem. Some people take this to believe that what they uncovered was actually the book of Deuteronomy, which tells the people not only how to engage in proper worship, but perhaps most important to God, how to live out God's will in their lives. This included instructions that they were to treat the poor with dignity, to regard the outcasts, the widows, and the orphans with care. It also instructed them how the resident alien should receive hospitality within their land, and they should never succumb to the worship of false idols. The king thought this so important that he wanted all the people to hear. And so he gathered the elders, the priests, the prophets, and all the people of Israel, both great and small, and he read aloud the book of the covenant. And then he would re-enter that covenant on behalf of the people to their God, and Josiah would begin major reforms in the institution of worship. He had to go throughout the land and get rid of elements of idol worship, such as poles that were dedicated to the goddess Asherah, the high places and altars that had been built up and scattered throughout the land. They found vessels that had been dedicated to the god Baal. All of these had to be destroyed. He desperately wants the people to return to right and proper relationship to the one true God. Maybe he was inspired simply because this was the right thing to do. Maybe he feels this is his duty as king. Perhaps, and most importantly of all, he wants the people to cling to hope. We heard last week from the prophet Isaiah about doom and destruction that they could not avoid. Yet, that scripture reading ended with the words, "A shoot shall come forth from a tree of Jesse." There is always some hope to cling to, even when we believe all hope is lost. Unfortunately, as we read the rest of 2 Kings and we know the history of the people of Judah, they cannot avoid the political turmoil that is taking place throughout the region. The northern kingdom has already fallen to Assyria. We read about that in 2 Kings chapter 15. And we know that those inhabitants of Israel have already been deported. We know that Egypt is allied with Assyria, but they start to lose strength. And later, as Babylon will press upon Assyria, Pharaoh of Egypt will come to try to lend them support. And on their way to support Assyria, they must pass in close proximity to Judah. And King Josiah, wanting to help his people, wanting to be a good king, will try to go out and meet them. to try to make some kind of political alliance to save Judah, but he will be killed in the process. And we know the rest of the story. Babylon will not only take over Assyria, but they will sack Jerusalem and destroy the temple. How do God's people find hope during this kind of chaos? How can they believe a prophecy that a tiny shoot is going to come out of what appears to be an entirely dead stump of a tree? Why go to the efforts to reform a temple that is about to be destroyed? Does it make any sense? It makes nearly as much sense as a woman going to buy her dying mother a new refrigerator. Maybe we should just start packing things up, tying up loose ends and preparing for the worst, as they say. Yet, we follow instructions out of duty, out of a sense of what is right for the people, and to give someone who needs it a much-needed sign of hope. It is for times such as these that the prophets speak to God on behalf of the people, and then the prophet turns around and speaks to people on behalf of God. These are scriptures that lead us directly into Advent, a time when we are all looking forward to signs of newness of life. It is a liminal time as we pass over the threshold of one year and we begin a new liturgical year. Advent is a time of peace, hope, joy, and love. Advent is that sprig of greenery appearing for us on a nearly dead tree stump of life. It is the story retold that God never abandons God's people. And somehow I think it is a story that speaks to us again and again, even to us in this time and this place. Never lose hope. Even when it seems the end is near, God still has a way for God's people. And on this Sunday that precedes Thanksgiving, I think that is worth giving thanks for. Join me in giving thanks to God.